It happened in less than 3 seconds. One moment, children were singing. A woman in the front row was waving a small flag made of cloth, stitched by hand. An elderly man raised his hand in salute. The air was filled with pride, the kind that only grows when a country has bled and still stands tall. And then, the shot of tension, not from a weapon, yet, but from a movement. A soldier, young, nervous. His hands trembled just enough to betray him. In a crowd of hundreds, he pushed forward, past the line of guards who didn't see him at first, through the folding chairs, toward the stage where President Ibrahim Traoré stood speaking. The soldier raised something. It could have been a salute, but it wasn't. Gasps ripped through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Mothers shielded their children. A journalist dropped his mic. Security reached for their weapons. But Traoré didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't reach for safety. Instead, he stepped forward. No armor, no bodyguards in front of him. Just calm, silent, watching the man who aimed at him with a face that held more fear than hatred. In that moment, the country held its breath. And what happened next would not only rewrite the day, it would redefine what leadership means to millions. That morning, the city of Ouagadougou felt like it was breathing again. Vendors swept dust from their stalls with palm brooms. Children in oversized school uniforms skipped past lines of soldiers handing out bread. There were no sirens, no panic, just the quiet rhythm of a place learning how to hope again. The unity ceremony was meant to be symbolic, a gathering of farmers, students, nurses, and former rebels, all seated shoulder to shoulder in front of a plain wooden stage set up in the heart of the capital. No red carpet, no foreign press, just the people, and one man they came to see. President Ibrahim Traoré arrived with no fanfare, no black SUVs, no helicopter flyovers, just a convoy of old trucks and an open heart. He shook hands like he meant it, listened like he was learning. When he took the mic, he didn't speak like a man above them. He spoke like a man among them. "We have all lost something," he said. "Some of us, family, others, freedom. But today, we gather not to remember pain, but to remember that we are still here." Applause rose like a wave. Not loud, not forced, just honest. But not far from the stage, someone else was watching. A young soldier, barely 25, stood stiffly near the back row, fingers twitching against the fabric of his uniform. His badge was clean, but his heart was chaos. He had not come to cheer. He had not come for unity. He had come for something else. His name was Souleymane Diallo, and this was the day he believed he would make the president listen. Souleymane had rehearsed the moment 100 times in his mind. He knew the layout, the stage, the gaps in the crowd, the rhythm of the president's speech. He had studied the position of the guards, watched how they blinked slower when the speech was calm. He wore his uniform like armor, not for honor, but for access. As Traoré spoke, Souleymane moved forward, each step tightening the knot in his chest. His eyes burned. His breath shortened. His fingers grazed the cold metal inside his coat. A pistol, hidden, loaded, not for chaos, not even for death, for a message. He wasn't there to shoot blindly. He was there to prove a point, one he believed no one would ever hear unless it was carved into silence. And then it happened. He slipped through the last gap in the crowd, just 10 feet from the stage, and pulled the weapon free. Gasps broke from every corner. Screams followed. The guards moved. Hands went to holsters. But then, an order, sharp and immediate. "Stand down." The voice came not from a general, not from fear, but from Traoré himself. He raised his hand slowly, as if calming a storm with a single breath. Security froze. Not one moved. And then Traoré did something no one expected. He stepped off the stage, walked directly toward Souleymane, and stopped only a few feet away. No armor, no fear, just steady eyes, meeting the ones of a trembling man who didn't know whether to run or weep. The pistol in Souleimane's hand trembled, and the president said calmly, "If you must pull the trigger, do it now. But know this, long before you raised that weapon, I had already forgiven you. For a moment, time shattered. And then, the weapon slipped from Soleiman's hand and hit the ground with a dull, impossible softness. His knees buckled, and the would-be assassin collapsed, not into death, but into tears. The sound of the pistol hitting the ground should have been followed by shouting, by chaos, by the stampede of guards rushing to subdue the threat. But nothing came, only silence. Soleiman knelt on the dirt, hands limp at his sides, the tears falling faster than he could wipe them. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. He just wept, like a dam that had been holding back years of betrayal and grief finally cracked open. Traoré didn't look at the weapon. He didn't glance at his security. He looked only at the man who had nearly taken his life. "Your pain must be louder than your anger," he said softly. "And your story, it was never meant to end with gunfire." Soleiman looked up through red eyes, lips trembling. "I didn't come here to kill you," he choked. I wanted you to feel what we feel, forgotten, alone, nothing." Traoré nodded slowly. "I have felt it," he said, "but I chose not to pass it forward." The guards began to move, uncertain, looking to the president for orders. Traoré raised a hand, not to stop them, but to signal gentleness. "Take him," he said quietly, "but do not hurt him. Treat him not as a traitor, but as a man who cried for help in the only language the world ever taught him, violence." The crowd, still frozen, watched as the guards lifted Soleiman from the ground and led him away, not with force, but with care. No one clapped, no one cheered. They simply watched as a man who could have chosen wrath chose something far more dangerous in the eyes of history. He chose mercy. And that, more than any bullet, pierced the heart of the nation. The room was small, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of dust and disinfectant. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering occasionally like it too, was unsure of what to do. Soleiman sat across from two intelligence officers, wrists resting on the table. They hadn't cuffed him. He hadn't resisted. He just stared at the floor, eyes hollow, lips pressed into a tight, painful silence. The officers asked questions, the kind meant to expose conspiracies, foreign interference, organized plots. But the more they asked, the clearer it became. There was no conspiracy. There was just a young man with a heart full of rage and nowhere to put it. "I wasn't sent," Soleiman finally whispered. "I wasn't promised anything. I just wanted someone to notice." He looked up, voice cracking. "My brother died last year, shot by militants during a supply raid in the north. They told us his name would be honored. They told us his sacrifice meant something." He paused, trembling. "But when we asked for help to bury him, no one came. No coffin, no flag, just a plastic bag and silence." The officers exchanged glances. The tape recorder clicked on softly in the background. Soleiman's fists tightened. "I used to believe in everything, in this country, in him. But after a while, all I saw was speeches. No change, no justice. I didn't want to kill him. I wanted to make him listen." The younger officer leaned forward. "And now?" Soleiman's shoulders sank. "Now I don't know what I want, except to disappear." The room fell silent, not out of protocol, but out of heartbreak. Because in that moment, even the men assigned to interrogate him realized Soleiman wasn't their enemy. He was their reflection, a wounded citizen, desperate for dignity in a world that had taught him to scream with violence because no one ever listened to his words. And for the first time since his arrest, he felt something break. Not fear, not shame, but the faint, flickering edge of regret. Long before the stage, before the uniform, before the presidency, Ibrahim Traoré was just a boy standing on the edge of a dirt road, watching men with weapons argue in the sun. He was 16. The year rebels stormed the outskirts of his village. They weren't strangers. Some were older cousins, neighbors who used to fix bicycles or share tea under mango trees. But something had shifted. Hunger, fear, rage. The government had abandoned them, and now they returned with rifles instead of words. That day, Traoré stood beside his best friend, Malik. They were carrying buckets of water from the well when the rebels blocked the road. "Where are you going?" one of them barked. "Home," Malik answered. "Just water." But one of the soldiers didn't believe him. He stepped forward and slammed the butt of his rifle into Malik's chest. Malik hit the ground. The bucket spilled. Traoré froze. He looked the rebel in the eye. He knew him. He was once a school teacher. Now his face was sunken, hard, lost. Traoré reached down to help his friend up. The gunman raised his weapon, and in that moment, time held its breath. But instead of flinching, Traoré stood still. "I am not your enemy," he said, "but if you shoot me, I'll become a ghost that haunts your sleep." The man hesitated, then lowered his gun and walked away. That night, Malik couldn't stop shaking. He kept whispering, "Why didn't you run?" And Traoré, staring at the stars, whispered back, "Because someone had to stay standing." He never forgot that day. It wasn't the violence that changed him. It was the silence that followed. The realization that pain left unspoken always returns with teeth. So when he looked at Suleiman that day, years later, weapon shaking in hand, Traoré didn't see a threat. He saw himself, and that made all the difference. Across the country, the news spread like fire, but it didn't roar. It whispered, it wept, it waited. The moment Traoré stood before the soldier with no armor and no fear was broadcast on nearly every screen, in every village with a signal, and every tea shop with a battery-powered radio. But it wasn't the image of a gun being raised that stuck with people. It was what happened after. In a dusty village in the north, a mother paused as she stirred a pot of maize porridge. Her hands trembled when she saw the headline on her neighbor's tiny screen. "President faces gunman. No shots fired." Her son had died in the army 6 months earlier. She had screamed at the wind for answers, cursed the name of every leader. But now, watching this man refuse to flinch, refuse to condemn, something softened. She wiped her eyes. "Maybe," she whispered, "we still have a chance." In a cramped tea stall near Bobo Dioulasso, 2 old men argued over politics every day. One supported the military, the other, revolution. That morning, neither argued. They just watched the replay, again and again. And when Traoré stepped off the stage and forgave the man aiming at him, the elder one whispered, "My God, he doesn't lead like they do." "No," the other replied. "He leads like we wish they did." In a prison cell just south of Ouagadougou, an inmate stared through metal bars as guards spoke in hushed voices. He turned to his cellmate. "What happened?" "They say the president spared a man who tried to kill him." The prisoner laughed once, short and bitter. "No one spares men like us." But deep down, even he wasn't sure anymore. And in a school classroom in the capital, a little girl tugged at her teacher's sleeve. "Madam, is he afraid of guns?" The teacher, caught off guard, smiled. "No, my dear, he's not afraid of guns." "Then what is he afraid of?" The teacher thought for a moment, then replied gently, "He's afraid of a country that forgets how to forgive." And across Burkina Faso, that fear began to fade. Not because of a policy, not because of a speech, because in a single act of restraint, the president didn't just stop a bullet. He reminded his people that mercy was still possible. And in a world where every headline screams and every leader yells, Traoré led with silence, and the silence echoed. 3 days had passed. Suleiman remained in custody, no longer in a cold cell, but in a quiet room within the presidential security facility. No restraints, no interrogation lights, just time. Time to sit with what he'd done. Time to ask himself what it meant. He hadn't eaten much, spoke even less. The only words he'd managed since the arrest were to a guard who brought his meals. He'd whispered, "Is he angry?" The guard hadn't answered. And then, on the 4th day, something unthinkable happened. The door opened, not with force, not with an order, but with a calm knock. Suleiman looked up, expecting a senior officer or maybe another round of questioning. But it wasn't a guard. It was him, President Ibrahim Traoré, alone. No guards, no media, no advisors. Just a man in a simple uniform holding 2 cups of tea. Soleiman stood instinctively, unsure whether to salute, kneel, or hide. Traoré simply raised a hand. Sit. He placed the tea on the table and took the seat across from him. There was a long silence between them, not the kind filled with tension, but the kind heavy with things too sacred for small talk. Finally, Traoré spoke. "You didn't want to kill me," he said gently. "You wanted me to see your pain." Soleiman stared at the table. "I didn't know how else to speak." Traoré nodded. "The world taught you that pain only gets attention when it shouts." He took a sip of tea, then placed it down. "But what if we taught it to speak differently?" Soleiman's voice cracked. "Why are you here? Why would you talk to me?" Traoré leaned forward. "Because the man who raised a weapon is still alive, and that means he can still change." He slid a small envelope across the table. Soleiman picked it up. Inside was a handwritten letter. A government pardon? No. A job offer. Rehabilitation unit. Trauma counseling corps. Civilian outreach. "Use your story," it read, "not your silence." Soleiman's hands trembled. "You're giving me a second chance?" Traoré's eyes didn't waver. "I'm not giving it," he said. "You're earning it. Starting now." 12 months had passed. The city no longer whispered about the attempted assassination. It had become something else. A story, a lesson, a quiet legend passed from mouth to mouth like scripture. And in the northern town of Titao, beneath the shade of a wide baobab tree, a group of young ex-combatants sat cross-legged in a circle. Some had seen war. Others had been recruited as children. Most had never spoken about their trauma out loud. Today, that changed. The man standing before them wore no uniform, just a plain shirt and calm eyes. Souleymane Diallo. He wasn't the man they had read about in the headlines. He wasn't the man who once raised a gun to the president. That man was gone, buried under months of reflection, service, and quiet transformation. Now, he was a bridge, a guide for those who thought they were too far gone to come back. He told his story with honesty. No theatrics, no excuses. "I thought I had no voice," he said. "So I tried to speak with violence." He paused. "But someone heard me anyway." The group was silent, not out of politeness, but out of recognition. They saw themselves in him. After the session ended, a young boy, barely 16, approached him. "Did you really almost shoot the president?" he asked, eyes wide. Soleiman nodded once. "But he didn't shoot back," he said. "He listened. That's what changed me." The boy looked down at his scarred hands, then whispered, "Do you think I can change too?" Soleiman placed a hand on his shoulder. "You already have." Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré sat in his modest office, reading a report stamped with the words, "Reintegration Pilot Program, Progress Report." At the bottom was a name he recognized, not because it haunted him, but because it humbled him. Souleymane Diallo, Director, Civilian Healing Division. Traoré smiled faintly, then turned the page. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Ibrahim Traoré walked alone through a quiet street in the capital. No cameras, no guards, just him. A group of children ran past, kicking a flat football made of bundled rags. One of them stopped, breathless, and looked up. "Are you the president?" he asked, eyes wide. Traoré crouched to his level, smiled gently, and replied, "Sometimes." The boy tilted his head. "What are you the rest of the time?" Traoré's gaze drifted toward the sky. "A student," he said. "Always learning." The boy nodded as if he understood more than anyone else ever had. Then he ran to join the others. Traoré stood there for a moment longer, feeling the weight of leadership, not as a crown, but as a quiet promise. He remembered Souleymane's face, the tears, the weapon, the moment mercy changed everything. Some leaders wield fear, others wield power. But the rarest, the ones remembered long after their statues fall, wield forgiveness. That's the kind of man he chose to be. And in that choice, a nation began to heal. If this story moved you, if it made you think about second chances, about the strength it takes to forgive, then don't scroll past it. Comment, "Real power is mercy." Like this video to help more people see the kind of leadership that doesn't just demand respect, but earns it. Subscribe to Honor Restored for more true stories of quiet strength, dignity, and the kind of courage the world desperately needs. Because sometimes the greatest victory is choosing not to pull the trigger.